First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to those of you who are personally in attendance here in Carwein, and welcome to all of our colleagues online on Zoom. I'm Michael Helser, and I'm the Assistant Director in the Milgard Center for Business Analytics. And I am delighted to host Kirsten Lum from Storytellers. She is the Chief Product Officer of Storytellers.ai. And Kirsten's talk today is Being an Outlier, how unique life experiences are an asset in data science careers. And I just think this is a fascinating topic. You know, I had the pleasure of meeting Kirsten and her team over a lovely lunch in downtown Tacoma early this summer. And we had a chance to talk about our respective organizations, our journeys, and learned that we had a lot of shared interests. And from that discussion and shared interests, I was just so grateful that Kirsten chose to come here and describe her journey into the field of data analytics with all majors here on the UW Tacoma campus. And so I've got bits and pieces of your story, but I can't wait to hear the entire suite. Now, to ensure that Kirsten has a proper introduction, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Wing-Yu Lum, and he is the CEO of Storytellers.ai. But before I do that, let's give the Storytellers team and Kirsten a warm UW welcome.
I will just be her hype man, which is my main job at the company. So if it's okay, I'll spend 30 seconds on what we're up to and why I think it's a worthwhile conversation, and I think it'll be a great lecture. So we're a machine learning firm, and our thesis, I believe, is deeply relevant to the subject matter you all are studying, and I'll tell you why. The thesis of our company has been that the better part of 10 or 15 years have been spent migrating substantial sources and types of data to the cloud, and descriptive statistics have been used in helpful ways to describe retrospective analysis. Things, software like, or platforms like Tableau have become enormously valuable, acquired by large SaaS companies, but there's still a huge green field of the opportunity to apply machine learning on top of that data, which I realize I may be saying, what's it called? When you're preaching to the choir, but I just want to kind of reaffirm that. For 6 years, I led a variety of growth functions at Amazon. The first thing that I led growth for was Amazon's marketplace, which is a $100 billion business that is the unsung hero, I believe, of a good amount of Amazon success. Very unsexy business, but does reasonably well. And then I was asked to lead growth for voice shopping. And in both of those capacities, I had the opportunity of being alongside a variety of brilliant practical scientists. And I'll say that the origin of our company came directly from Kirsten. And so I think one of the things that might be interesting and worthwhile to hear for context on Kirsten, she is also my wife, and so that may lead me to some bias, but there was a time when she was not my wife and she was just a brilliant person I had encountered. I think it's really critical to hear in her story that there is this whole idea of the immigrant mentality, and one of the things that drew me to this area, and we talked, and really I want to thank you, Michael, your persistence in bringing us down here and advocating for the students has stood with me on a heart level for a while. And one of the things you brought up is that many of the people that are part of this program come from backgrounds that are either unique to what one might call a traditional background, and you have a wide variety of call it traditional immigrants. I believe Kirsten in many ways is an immigrant as well. You'll hear it in her story, but she comes from a super non-traditional background. But by the time, and she'll never tell you this, because I'm her hype man, that's my job, that she has probably one of the 5 fastest career trajectories I've ever seen in the areas of, well, honestly, at Amazon. And she I think by the time she was done, she was leading a core science and economics team, one of a handful for a guy named Jeff Wilkie, who retired recently, and he was the CEO of Worldwide Consumer at Amazon. And so, as you go through this conversation with her, my only and humble ask would be, she will never, I think, do a proper job of fully representing the degree of her achievements, but I really do believe that her comments are worth listening to. She's helped dozens, if not hundreds of people find a better path as it relates to analytics, both in the context of Amazon, now at our small but growing startup. And so I'm really deeply grateful once more to you, Michael, for the sacrifice you put in to bring us here, and it's just left a great impression on us. So thank you for advocating for the students.
Thanks so much for the introduction. And I can always say, find a husband that can do both. You know, be the CEO of your startup as well as your hype man. It's a rare thing to find, but I can say that's the best. Thanks for having me here. Really excited to talk to y'all. The title of my talk is Being an Outlier. I consider myself an outlier in AI and data science pretty strongly across a few parameters. And one of the things I feel most passionately about is helping people from various backgrounds come into this discipline, in large part because of what Wing you said of like, there's so much work to be done, and it's such a powerful tool for making the lives of humans better. I've never seen anything like it. My kind of at the top disclaimer is this is my personal experience, and as much I try and draw from that and say, what are the principles that I've learned from my personal experience? Some of this will apply to you, some of it might not, but I hope some of this can help you, set vision for what is possible here, even if you feel like an outlier. So as Wing you said, I am right now the Chief Product Officer for Storytellers.ai. It's a startup where our kind of mission is we are helping businesses that are outside, say, the Fortune 500 mostly, to integrate machine learning and AI applications where they have maybe never tried the technique before. And what we're finding is that there are plenty of organizations that aren't Amazons, they're not Googles, they're not Facebooks, but they have enough data to where this kind of technique can really change their organization, but they don't have the expertise yet to pull it in. Prior to that, I was a senior manager for data science at Amazon. I led a team of data scientists, business intelligence engineers, economists in one of the largest organizations at Amazon. It's the central part of Amazon. You've probably heard Amazon's like this set of startups. I was in the mothership, so to speak, the center of it where, I wasn't in Prime, I wasn't in, video. I was in the central part of Amazon. And that meant that I got to see customer relationship, how Amazon's customer relationship spanned all of those different products. So that was about the widest, biggest set of data that you can acquire at Amazon. That was what my team's purview was, which was really fun. I was chosen for the LEAP Accelerated Leadership Program. So that was just a handful of people, about 150 people get chosen for that each year in order to accelerate leaders through Amazon. And I'll talk a little bit more about my time at Amazon as I walk through. But last slide about me. I can't get through a presentation like this without showing my amazing family. There's Wing Yu and our oldest daughter, who is his twin. I don't know if you can tell from this picture. They look identical. It's adorable. My sister, who also works with us and helps me take care of these two. My youngest daughter in her natural habitat of eating food constantly. Also very adorable. And our huge dog named Huan. If you are a Lord of the Rings fan, I'll let you look that up later, who Huan is in Lord of the Rings lore. But he's a great guy. So on to sort of my main topic. The background for my topic is that in machine learning and AI work, generally the way that it's done is it's done inside a system, a group of experts coming together to coordinate to build an application. There are, especially when I'm thinking about my time at Amazon, we have PMs, we have data engineers, we have BIs, we have, AI folks, and then we also have people who need their problems solved with AI. So we have our salespeople, our marketers, customer service agents, we have teachers, we have government officials. Those are on the other side, and they need to be coordinated in order to build a product that actually works to solve a problem in the domain. So a visual of that might look something like this, where you've got your ML and AI expertise over on one side, your domain expertise on the other, and there's some coordination that's happening between the two. This is very, very typical at most organizations because there's so much that goes into any one of these circles. You can be an expert in coordinating these two things, which is actually where I got my start in ML, was being the red circle in this diagram, coordinating the ML folks and the domain experts. But one thing when the reason why those folks need to be coordinated is because domain expertise tends to have really, really deep knowledge of questions like what problems exist in this domain, or what data is available in this domain, whereas what data is being generated by our domain. Who are the decision makers and what decision-making process do they follow? That's something that a domain expert tends to know. So the call center folks, they're in the call center, they know what data is being generated by the call center, they know how they're making decisions. That's information that generally the AI and ML folks don't have. So even when we're working at Amazon, a new AI person comes in, they would have no idea. How does someone in the call center make a decision? What data do they need to make a decision? They don't know the answer to those questions, but they do know things like what kind of applications exist in AI and ML, and if you approach me with a problem, I could connect that to a solution. Things like what data would we need to build this application? That's a set of expertise that someone with AI and ML would be able to answer. Or things like how accurate does this data product need to be in order to make a difference for someone in this space? So these two sets of expertise tend to be separate, and then you have coordination in between, saying, the AI folks have told me this is how accurate our model is, and then the domain folks say, oh, that's not quite right, and you've got the coordination back and forth in iteration. The problem is that for a lot of organizations, that's way too expensive. That's a lot of people. Not only is AI and ML expertise very expensive to acquire in a lot of cases, which is hopefully part of the reason why you're here, is because you can get paid pretty well doing ML and AI. But that also means that you need folks that can coordinate, that have enough domain expertise and enough ML expertise they can actually connect the dots between those two things. And if that coordination isn't there, and there's no overlap between the ML and AI expertise and the domain expertise, those projects tend to fail. Like even if you can build the model that's built actually doesn't solve the problem that the domain expert needs. And this is the number one reason I see why ML products don't actually make it into production, is the thing that was built didn't quite meet the need of the domain expert. So this brings me to the idea of outliers. One reason why I chose this word specifically, and this is in the context of ML and AI, is a lot of times folks might have the impression of I'm an outsider to this field. So just one stat, depending on the source you go to, my source is Kaggle's most recent survey of the data science community. Somewhere about 15% of data scientists are women. This is a very tiny number. And one way to think about that position, my position there, is that I'm an outsider to ML and AI. But I actually prefer the idea of outlier because there is a ton of value in having experiences which are difficult to find within the ML and AI community. And I'll explain that a little more. So idea of outlier, you're from an underrepresented group in terms of the ML and AI space. You are coming from a prior field. So that could be like you worked a job all through college and you worked at a lumber mill all through college, you know how a lumber mill works. It's very rare for someone in ML and AI to know how a lumber mill works. It's very rare. You could be an artist, you could be from athletics. It could also be something like an uncommon experience that you had in your past as a child or as an adult. Things like going through immigration, being low income, coming from a rural area. These are experiences that are not super common for people who have AI and ML expertise. And so having that, what that does is that means that the domain expertise and the ML and AI expertise live in the same person. So that coordination problem that can happen when the AI person goes out and builds the product and then the domain person looks at it and says, this isn't what I need, it solves that bridge. And it solves that bridge, especially in places where I feel really passionately about, places that have not yet been touched by AI and ML. So you think about things like local government. Like AI and ML are not used very often in local government because some of this expertise is difficult to find. Or education would be another place where it's very difficult to get AI and ML integrated into an educational space because it's so rare to find domain expertise and willingness to cover that whole system. So folks that have this, I call outliers, and I can attest personally, when I would hire at Amazon, I'd look at people's resumes, and they'd have like at the bottom, they'd have their education, it'd be like, this person got a double major in theater and political science. I'm like, great, I'm gonna talk to that person. Like, where did they come from where they have this totally different degree, and now they're experience right now. They're in Disney working as a data scientist. What did that journey look like? And what expertise did they bring with them from their domains into their data science work that's going to make our ability to solve problems that much stronger? So this is my sort of transition into, this is also something that I personally experienced. So one thing that you might have noticed when I introduced myself, I didn't talk about my education yet, so it's an interesting story there. But first, before I get there, I'm like a fifth generation Washingtonian. My family is from Pomeroy, so we're wheat farmers and cattle farmers down in southeastern Washington. I was born in Spokane. I grew up in Pomeroy, and I graduated high school from OMAC. So these are all just very rural places around the state. My family, farmers. My dad works for the DNR, if you're familiar. My mom works in healthcare. My brother's in the military. So we're not a high-tech family. This is not our background. The place I come from has names for places like. I was laughing because I was looking at this the other night. It's places like Sweeney's Gulch. Like that just really that's where I come from. I'm from Sweeney's Gulch, Or we have a mountain range called the Devil's Backbone. Like that's where I come from. Very rural, very cool. I love being from there. And you might have thought I'm out here in this rural area, and you might imagine me as a child, doing differential equations on the side of a barn or something. I was just destined to be a data scientist despite this. But actually, I hated math so much. I can't describe. When I was young, it was I was doing theater, I was doing music, I was doing art, I was reading, I was writing. That was my world. So I didn't even really know I wanted to go to college, even by the time I was senior year in high school. I was I don't really know what I would do. But what I loved doing, I loved learning languages. I was can't do that in OMAC. So I guess I'm going to go to college. Well, the first college I went to was Spokane Falls Community College. That was where I decided to go because it was spring of my senior year and everywhere else was closed to applications. So if you didn't notice that the mascot of Spokane Falls Community College is the Sasquatch. So that's where I went. I was in community college and I was actually I kind of like this higher ed thing. I think I'm gonna do this. I was studying Japanese. So the next place that I could go is very close, is Eastern Washington University has a Japanese program. So I was I'm gonna go to Eastern, I'm gonna continue learning Japanese. I'm gonna be a teacher, an ESL teacher. So I went to Eastern Washington for a little while. But they cap out, they don't have a major, they just have a minor. So I was by the time I got through that, the one place that I can go to get a Japanese major is the UW. So I transferred over to the UW as a Japanese major and immediately bombed out of the program. I was there I think I took two, I think I was in the 401 at that point. And I think I got a D- in my first class, my Japanese major. The leap was just way too big coming from a school in Spokane teaching Japanese versus coming here learning Japanese. So I took a quarter off. And you might be thinking at that point, I heard this voice, it's take intro to stats, right? Maybe that's the voice you think that was, but no, I was still, this is my secret. I don't know if the school will really love me telling you this. I got through my entire bachelor's degree without taking a math class, which is a real achievement, if I know all of you know. I actually didn't take another math class. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But at that point, I decided I wanted to be a librarian, which is a very cool job, but you need a master's degree. So I was okay, I'll get my English degree and then go back for my master's as a librarian. Graduated with a bachelor's degree in English Lit. So that's why I didn't introduce myself with my, MIT, whatever. No, I got a bachelor's degree in English Lit from the University of Washington. So that leads into my career. So I've graduated with this bachelor's degree. That's one way I feel like an outlier, by the way. I only have a bachelor's degree. I don't have a master's degree in math or anything like that. I have a bachelor's degree in English Lit. But at that time, I was working at a grocery store. I was working at Whole Foods, and I don't know if you know the wall of cut fruit. To make that, the people are standing in the back of the store in a walk-in freezer to make those. And that was my job at the time, was being in a walk-in freezer. Seattle, so I'm walking to work in the dark, working in a walk-in freezer the whole day, and then walking home in the dark. And I was so motivated, this can't be what I do. I am so motivated to find something else. So I was talking to my friend about that, and she's you should just apply to the startup that I am working at now. She also was in my English degree. So she's like, you should apply this startup. So I applied, got an interview. There was absolutely no reason why these folks would hire me. Like I didn't know how to write a resume. I didn't know what they were looking for in this job. It was in marketing. But the person who should have interviewed me was out that day. So I was interviewed by someone else. The person who should have interviewed me was Wing Yu, but he was out. We joke about this, that he probably wouldn't have hired me, which would have been totally fair. Like it would have been totally fair if he had not hired me. But someone else did that interview. I got hired. And I realized there was something that clicked at that moment where I was like, I actually really love this. Like I love this, like looking at a business, looking at these operations, how we do this stuff in startup, because you kind of have to do everything when you're in startups. I'm like, I really enjoy this. And so I worked at the startup for about a year. Wing Yu was leading the startup at the time. And I remember we had this conversation. We had the conversation at some point, kind of maybe midway through my time at Cut, where he could see that I was excelling at what I was doing despite not having a background in this. And he had this, we were just talking about this last night, like what was that conversation about? Because it was an inflection point. And it was like, are you going to choose to become strong in this thing that you're new to, both because it's something wonderful to do and because it's going to allow you to be strong to help other people who have this, come from this kind of place that you've come from, of you're being an outlier in this space. And I just remember, like, not only have I been motivated, I'm still motivated to do this. This has changed my life. Being able to do this has totally changed my life. Well, a couple months later, despite being just colleagues for a long time, we and I one day woke up and we're like, you know what, this works, like this works. So we decided we were gonna date. And so I left the startup so that, HR, all that stuff. So I left the startup. In that time, I had some skills now at this point. I've been working only for a year, but I had some skills and some knowledge in marketing. What had really captivated me at kind of towards the end of my time at Cut was we were building these processes and then reviewing metrics around these processes. And I had just, for the first time, heard of SQL. And I was like, that was really interesting stuff. And so one of the things that, and I'm going to come back to this idea, but one of the things that Wing Yu did for me that totally changed the trajectory of my life was he sat down with me and he described, for a role in this space, here are the skills that you'll need to have, and here's how to demonstrate that you have those skills. Like, it seems so simple, but that's one of the rules and the processes in this world that I feel like is not well described to people. Here's how to figure out the skills you need for a given job, and here's how to demonstrate that you have those skills to someone who's going to be reviewing your resume. And he also is amazing at building resumes. He could tell a whole bunch of stories about how he's changed lots of people's lives just by helping them with their resume. I say just, it's a ton of work, but by helping them with their resume, really changed their lives. So that led to, he also made this introduction to one of his old friends at Expedia. He had worked at Expedia prior. And I interviewed, just squeaked through the SQL test that they gave, just by the skin of my teeth, and got this job as an analyst at Expedia. All right, so I'm going to tell two more anecdotes about this idea of Outlier. One of my favorite ones is my time at Expedia. About halfway through, I was there for about 2.5, 3 years. About halfway through, I was handed this process that was being run by Excel spreadsheets. I don't know if you feel like the hackles, there's some people just like, Excel spreadsheets. This process was really painful. It was 3 people, 10 hours a day, refreshing pivot tables, copying formulas, and then that whole thing would crash and they'd have to start over and they're copying and pasting, and I see someone who's like, it's really painful. You'll probably do a job like that, by the way, at some point. And I learned a lot having that job. But Wing Yu and I were having dinner with one of his good friends, Chris Gutierrez, who also now advises our organization. And he's one of the people who he led Airbnb's data science organization, did their fraud detection. He's like an OG data scientist, been doing it for a long time. He's like, that sounds like something you should probably be doing in Python instead of in Excel. And I was like, okay, I have no idea. Like I have no, I don't know how hard it is to learn Python, if it's hard or not. But I approached my boss and I was like, could I transfer this process over to Python? He's like, I don't think so. I don't think I'll be able to understand what it's doing. So just keep doing it in Excel. I was like, great. Kept doing it in Excel. But at night, I went and learned Python, enough Python to transfer this process from Excel into this little algorithm. And instead of 30 man hours a week, it was taking 8 seconds. And I was like, I was hooked. I was so hooked. And that moment was the moment that I knew, like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to do this. Because I could see, it's just like, I've never seen a tool like this that can actually transform an organization so fast. I can take 2 weeks and absolutely, like, eliminate 30 hours of work a week. It was amazing. My boss then was like, okay, fine, yes, we can do this. So that was actually where I really think of my data science career starting, was that moment where I wrote my first lines of Python. From that point, I had always, you remember how I wanted to be a librarian? I was like, if there's some way I can connect this new like tech career I have back to my love for like books, the connection point would be Kindle. So I'd already had in my mind, like, if there was a really great role in the Kindle organization at Amazon, I would probably go do it. Well, a role came up when you once again helped me with this process. Like, what does this, break down this role? What is this role looking for? What are the skills? How do you demonstrate that skills? As you know, he was already at Amazon too, so he made this amazing introduction, which again, I'll talk about the idea of advocacy for other people as like, there is very few levers that big in this world beyond, advocacy. And I got this role with Kindle. I was super excited. I was like the third person on this team that was going to do device engagement marketing. So after you buy your Kindle, after you buy your tablet, what is Amazon doing to make sure that your experience is good and you're sticking with that device? Well, of course, because I was an analyst, I come in, I'm like, great, look, I know SQL, I'll write my own reports, it's all good. I thought, like, this is gonna be great. And of course, there was no data. The data was so bad. So that was my first realization, like, there are things worse than messy data. There are places where there's no data. So one of the things I was like, well, this is my job though. Like, I need to figure out how to make this work. So I started working with the software engineering team. You remember I talked about I'm the red circle. I was coordinating the software engineering team with this business team to say, what data do we need in order to run this new engagement function that we're building out? And that really was where I encountered huge scale data, like we're processing hundreds of millions of records every single day to try and do this analytics, and how even within this discipline, there are different tools that can allow you to be effective at those different scales. So that's where I started working with ML and AI versus, say, like a true analyst that's doing more like SQL and backward-looking analytics. And again, like that was another step function of like, I love this stuff. I really love this stuff. So that's where when I was a principal product manager, that was where I went through in terms of my promotion to principal product manager was based on some of that work I did, re-instrumenting Amazon devices. And then my manager also gave me the opportunity again for the LEAP program based on when I start working with folks on there, it's like, when I start working with folks in this space and can connect the work that they want to do to the work that's available, people will want to work for you. And that's one of the things that I learned from like my experience with Wing U helping me understand what are the skills you need, how do you demonstrate those skills. And so based on that, I was also recommended to the LEAP program and became a senior manager of PM Tech for data science, which we've touched on a little bit. So that's how I got to be a data scientist at Amazon in the Fortune 10, despite the fact that I have a degree in English literature. And then the last thing I'll talk about is our transition to storytellers. Because I got to see, as a manager, I got to see how hard it is to find data scientists, how in demand they are, and how few there are relative to the number of jobs, and how much they're paid, because I was having to like figure out salaries for all the folks that were working for me. Like, there's no way that like a small to medium-sized business will be able to use this technique if this is how much it costs. But these businesses really could use this technique. Even within Amazon, there's lots of different businesses inside the overall Amazon. And I saw how like there's this 12-person team. They have plenty of data, but they have no idea how to like use AI and ML on it. So I'm going to come in and help them like transform their business to using ML and AI. But there's plenty of businesses that are exactly that size that aren't at Amazon, that can't afford to hire a team. I think that's a business idea. And that's where we decided to build Storytellers. And that thesis has proved to be pretty true. There's lots of organizations that have benefited from that. But in that sense, you know, I talk about being an outlier as this different framing of rather than outsider, it's an outlier. So even though I was an outsider from the sense that I don't have a PhD in math like a lot of my peers did at Amazon, but what I wouldn't want to say is that, like, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Like, if you work hard enough, everything's going to be okay. The reality is that not having, say, a credential like I did, I don't have a credential like you all will have going into this space, makes you more vulnerable. I don't know if we're all sick of this image by now. I feel like this image has been going around a lot on social media recently, but it's like this image of during World War II, they were trying to figure out where to put more armor on these planes. And so they're like, well, let's analyze the planes that come back, see where they're getting hit by bullet holes, and let's put the armor there. But the reality is that if you look at the pattern, the reason the bullet holes aren't in the other spots is because those were the planes that didn't make it back. So they're not even in the data set to analyze. And that I feel like is sort of this image of being an outlier. Like you just don't have the same level of protection that someone who's not an outlier might have. Like if you're coming from a low income background, your family doesn't have a lot of money to fall back on. So you may not, have the same opportunity as someone who doesn't have that. They aren't an outlier in that sense. So, for that reason, that's why I feel so passionate about talking to people about being an outlier. And I call these cheat codes. These are what I learned being in that position. These are a few things that I've learned that have helped me to sort of bolster my abilities in a space that I don't feel is my natural space. I'm coming in as an outlier into the space. The first one is licorice jelly beans. Second one, easy question versus hard questions. Third one, confidence is a strategy. And the fourth one is expert mentors. Daniel Kahneman shows up a lot in here if folks love Daniel Kahneman, which I do. I think he's a super interesting guy. So first one is licorice jelly beans. This is sort of like more relevant before the pandemic, but people would put out like a bowl of jelly beans and people would come by and like pick them up, over time. And then at the end, there's just like the entire thing is the licorice ones. Like that would always happen. If you like licorice jelly beans, you will always have more jelly beans than you could ever eat. There's always licorice jelly beans left. But I'm going to take this analogy a little bit further. It's maybe totally absurd, but imagine that when you dumped a bunch of licorice or a bunch of jelly beans into a bowl, the licorice ones were always on the top and no one was allowed to eat any other jelly beans until the licorice ones were gone. That's what it's like working in ML. There are these tasks that everyone tries to avoid, but they are so necessary to doing ML and AI well. So if word gets around the office that you like licorice jelly beans, you will have so much job security. It's like absurd. This is one of my favorite cheat codes. So I'll give you kind of my estimation of tasks by jelly bean type. Everyone's favorite is over there, the like red and purple and pink ones. That's anything working with images, video, text, real time, natural language processing, deep learning. Those are the ones that everyone wants to do. And there's lots of competition for those jelly beans. The ones in the middle are the citrus jelly beans. It's like if I gave you a bag of citrus jelly beans, you'd be like, okay, I'll put that in my backpack, and like if one day you're like really hungry, I'll go ahead and eat them. Like that's fine. That's things like building tabular models, data labeling, rare event detections there now. It's like been solved really well with technology, so it's like you got to turn the crank, but it's doable. It used to be a red jelly bean, but now it's more in the citrus category. Data visualization is another one. You get a lot of points with executives if you're a good data visualizer, so that one tends to be a citrus one. And then the licorice jelly beans, if I gave you a bag full of licorice jelly beans, you probably would throw it directly in the garbage, right? Like it's not gonna go in the backpack, it's going in the garbage. But in ML and AI, ML ops, #1. If you know how to get data into your modeling environment and then get your model outputs into production, #1, absolute #1. SQL, I don't know about everyone here, like, there's some reason it feels like a low prestige language in the data science community. I don't understand why. I love SQL, but if you can write SQL, it's huge. Data engineering, very similar to the reason for ML ops. Like, if you know how to manage your data environment, people will give you work to manage data environments. Instrumentation and telemetry, that was one of the black jelly beans I chose, was instrumentation and telemetry. Privacy, security, and ethics. Like, everyone knows you need privacy and security, and everyone wants the ethics questions to be solved, but I can say for sure, if you are a person who actually can help solve ethics problems, like, that is for sure, you'll have way more black jelly beans than you can eat. Experiment design, that's a big one. You built the model, did it work? And that is a task that people tend to not want to do, but is super critical. And then communication and documentation. Communicating with stakeholders is like a whole discipline in and of itself, but being good at it is, I mean, that's actually one of the fastest ways to management that I've found, because you become the face of the team, and the team then very naturally starts to think of you as their leader, because you're doing this black jelly bean work of communicating with the stakeholders. So this is my estimation here. It's one of my favorite cheat codes. The second cheat code is easy questions versus hard questions. And so Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for figuring out that humans are not rational, which is always very interesting to, his books are super interesting. When you got to interview him while he was at Amazon, he got to like go and like interview him on a topic. And one of the quotes he said in that interview was, "The sum total of my research is that people replace hard questions with easy ones." So I'll talk about this idea of hard question versus easy one, just kind of briefly. In fact, all my examples are actually the ones because of my experience as an outlier. So I'm going to use my examples for this. Easy question that people will ask: what school did you go to? That's an easy question. Very easy to ask, very easy to answer. When you look at that on a resume, what does that actually mean? The hard question they're trying to ask is, are you up to date on the leading edge of this field? Now, this question's an interesting one. You guys won't have to deal with that. You're going to UW, so, you know, check mark, you went to UW. But what I might tell someone who, say, went to, like, WSU, I don't know, is, I'm totally joking, my brother went to WSU, so I have to make the joke, is to write on Medium. If you can go and read white papers on recent research in ML, and then you can go summarize that in a really nicely written Medium article, it demonstrates, it allows you to answer this hard question. Are you up to date on the research in this field? And then, who cares what school you went to, you know the answers to the questions that I'm asking. The second one, what degrees do you hold? This one's really personal to me, right? Like, I have a bachelor's degree in English Lit, but what they're really asking is, do you have the skills I'm looking for? Have you been trained in the skills that I need for this role? And one of the ways to do that, if you have a different degree and are coming into this field, is a GitHub portfolio. So go find projects, write the code, explain it well, put it in your GitHub portfolio, link your GitHub portfolio on your resume, and that helps them answer this hard question. Do you have the skills I'm looking for? The last one I'll go through is, which companies have you worked for? This is probably relevant to y'all too, coming into a new career in AI and ML. What they're really asking is, have you applied your skills to solve similar problems to the ones that I have? So for instance, because I worked at Amazon, you see the brand Amazon on my resume, someone at Walmart might be like, awesome, she's worked at Amazon, she's probably experienced the problems that I have. Or any other retailer can look at the fact that I've worked at Amazon to understand that I have actually encountered the problems they have. But if you haven't worked at many big brands like that, one way to approach it is Kaggle. So a lot of brands are actually putting data sets on Kaggle in lots of different domains. And then you can actually compete or submit notebooks to Kaggle with these different types of data, with these different kinds of problems, to demonstrate I can solve problems in this domain. I can solve vision problems, I can solve natural language processing problems, I can solve problems for retailers, I can solve problems for manufacturers. This is a really good way to do that. So that's the easy question versus a hard question. The third one is a little squishy. People talk about like confidence, kind of like, because it sounds like, how do you really quantify this? But the way that I like to talk about confidence is it's the intersection of being optimistic about your abilities and willing to take a calculated risk. And that combination is confidence. And I kind of have a visual of this. You imagine on the left-hand side is a more confident strategy. You can see there's more green squares, which means proceed, take this risk. Even when your estimated abilities are kind of in the middle, you know some of it, but you don't know all of it. The less confident strategy would be the right-hand side, nope, left-hand side for you guys, where there's more red squares. Not gonna take a risk if my estimated probability is low and there's a medium risk here. Just not gonna take that risk. What I found is that there is such a strong relationship between risk and reward that if you're able to take a calculated risk, the left-hand strategy tends to lead to more growth over time. And being able to build an accurate understanding of your abilities and saying, even though I don't know everything I need to know to solve this problem, I'm going to be optimistic that I will learn it and be able to take this risk and be successful on the other side. And this, like, I love this. I love talking to people who I can tell don't have a very confident strategy and helping them see, like, here are the axes, and now just test it. Like, test it. Go to somewhere where you feel a little bit too uncomfortable and try it out and see what happens. And then make yourself even just a little bit more uncomfortable and a little bit more uncomfortable, and you'll actually start to learn what your thresholds are, and then you'll see how differing levels of risk are related to the rewards that you can see on the other side. And that tends to be a pretty effective, this visual I really love to help folks with this idea of confidence. And then my last cheat code is expert mentors. And the reason why I bring it up next is because one of the things that's hard when you're new to a space is how do you estimate risk when you've never seen the problems before? It's really tough to say, I don't know how risky this thing is because I've never seen problems in this space. Well, this is another Daniel Kahneman quote. If you're in a domain where there is expertise and you don't have it, don't try to guess your way into the problem. You find experts who can provide guidance. And his way of describing experts are people where they're in a space where there are rules that you can learn. So it's not chaotic, there are rules that have had the opportunity to act in that space and then get real time or very fast feedback on how their actions are related to the outcome they get in that space. And the more you do that, that is the active building expertise. Go into a system governed by rules, act in that system, see what happens, and learn the rules via those iterations. And those folks are experts. This was a survey I did on Twitter recently. The place where you can find people who are experts in ML and AI apparently is Twitter. That's actually a place where you can find lots of people. Kaggle is actually the #1, came back as the #1. I was surprised. that this was the #1. I was thinking it was gonna be LinkedIn. But then the thing that people mentioned was not an option here is Reddit. So if you're like, I need to find someone who's an expert in this space, I don't know how to find them. These are the 3 that I recommend. Twitter, Kaggle, and Reddit are the places you could find people. And then this is the other thing that I didn't know, and I don't think is very often told people, but is so critical, which is how do you take an expert and turn them into a mentor? So you found your expert, but how do you get them to help you with this problem? So here's my 8 steps. There's a few of these are super critical that tend to be forgotten. So you identify a goal. You have to know what you need feedback on. That's really important. You need to try things on your own. So try a few experiments. Come up with a little bit of intuition about the rules of the space that you're operating in. Then find a lot of people who are experts in that space, because this is actually an explore-exploit program. Like, I don't know, 90% of them, maybe a little less, will not even respond. So you need to find a lot of folks, and then you need to contact them, introduce yourself, explain your goal and what you've tried, and then ask them for some feedback. And here's the part that lots of folks miss. write down everything they said, because they've, taken their time to explain, give you some advice. Write down everything they've said, and then send it back to them as notes, because that's actually a really valuable thing to a mentor. Is like right now, I'm talking right now. But if someone was transcribing what I was saying and then sent me here's what you said, there's actually an artifact and value there that that is super valuable, surprisingly. So write down what they said, send a summary back to them, and then go test what they did and report back on how it went. And those steps, step 5, writing down what they said, and then actually going and doing what they asked you to do, and then writing down how it went, and then sending them a note and saying, here's what happened. That cycle is, as someone who's mentored a lot of people, is very rare. It's very rare for me to mentor someone who actually writes down what I says, goes and tries it, and then comes back and says, hey, thanks, here's what happened, whether it's good or bad. It didn't work or it did work, that's very, very rare. And then when you have that cycle, the people who are giving you good advice, you can double down on that relationship. And a relationship usually means, 1, conscientious, follow up, be on time, be prepared, but also look for ways that you can add value to them, which is, might feel like there's nothing, I felt that a lot really early in my career. There's nothing I could do for this VP that's given me free advice that took them 20 years to gather. Being grateful is plenty. If that's all you can do, you can say thank you and take their advice. That's plenty. But be on the lookout. If they have an employee that's a little earlier in their career than you, help out that employee. There's things, even the small things, to help them with the problems they have goes a really long way in building relationships with these experts. All right, that is finding expert mentors. And now my last few slides, which were, I can't believe I timed it to I'm really shocked. My last few slides are just these little things that I thought about, I wish someone would have told me that earlier. And a lot of them kind of run counter to some of the intuition that tends to be in the ether about ML and AI. I hope it isn't too irreverent to talk about how to learn ML at a university, but I just have a little different perspective on it because I didn't learn ML at a university. One of the things that I found was really helpful if you're an absolute beginner in ML and AI is don't try and learn the independent skills deeply. Try and build an entire application, and very small one. So learning ML model by model is much faster than going on Coursera and finding a stats class and taking this whole stats class and then being just overwhelmed. So learning ML model by model, I find this is, here's another thing that I don't think is very well known. Most applications that I've run into, even in the Fortune 10, are tabular data that is batch processed. So a lot of the stuff that's red jelly bean stuff, berry jelly bean stuff, which is real-time vision, text, natural language processing, all of that, those are very, very rare in terms of the total number of applications that are in production versus your standard, you're writing a SQL query against a relational database and pulling out your feature set and making a prediction and writing it back to your SQL database. That is the vast majority of applications that I encountered. So that sort of process is really great for XGBoost or CatBoost. Pick up XGBoost, CatBoost, train a model, go through their how to, train your model, then go in and swap out that feature set. What happens when I swap out the feature set? What happens when I swap out the label? And just iterate that. And it actually gives you, I talk about the neurons, it'll give you the neurons that you want to connect to all that other very deep stuff, feature engineering, it's a whole thing, but if you don't know this whole system, even as a small application, it's very difficult to connect all this theory about feature engineering to that neuron. So that's one of my, I wish someone had told me. I took my first thing I did in ML was take a math for ML class where we were doing matrix factorization by hand. And so that's why it's very painful. I'm sure you all have gone through that pain as well. Number 2, I wish someone had told me. This is one example, but it sort of has a larger principle. Excluding data from your feature set because it doesn't seem like it's relevant is basically the same as stock picking, because you don't know, usually before you go into training your model, you won't know what's relevant. Or you might have intuition, which is really good to have, but the intuition should be, I will include as much as I can and let this statistical system tell me the relevance between the features and the outcome. And that's where you can have a lot of surprise, which is great when you're communicating your label. Like, business people love when you find like something surprising in the data. It's a great tactic. But it also makes better models. Like, if I thought, oh, this data set, I'm predicting, who's going to purchase in the next 30 days. I don't feel like this data around video watching is really relevant. And if I exclude it, I could miss the fact that, hey, when people are wanting to watch videos, there's also this purchasing behavior that happens around video watching. I would have missed that whole picture if I had just used my intuition to do my feature selection. And that's one of the things that I really love, is this technique is like augmenting our intuition. They work really well together. I think I have maybe one or two more. This is around MLOps. Again, my absolute favorite licorice jelly bean is MLOps. The most common struggle in MLOps isn't from the fact that you don't have the newest technology to manage your MLOps pipeline. It's because the models haven't been built in such a way that they're easy to put in production. And this is where I also love the idea of licorice jelly beans here, because the #1 technology for me for building MLOps pipelines, or for building models that are very easy to get in production, is writing clear SQL queries, but making them independent. So #1, knowing who is in the population for your model, define that separately, have that be your separate code. #2, what is the outcome that I'm trying to predict? And #3 is all the feature engineering. And having those being separate as opposed to combined together in one script has meant I don't need a lot of very high-tech tools in order to deploy my models, and they're very easy to deploy. It's like, this is one of the ones I'm like, why is this a secret? Like, I've seen so many, like, I work with these people in these large companies that have access to basically any tool they could use, but this tool works way better. Like, it just works way better. Sorry to all the MLOps platforms that are now cringing. But yeah, I love this pattern. Just define these things separately, run them as very clean SQL queries. It works super well. And this is the last one, and this is also a thematic. One of the things that I know is really true about me is that there was a bunch of stuff I had no idea about when I started in this space. And it's only with enough time that I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, someone helped me so much. I had no idea how much that person helped me. Like, when I first started my career, whether it's like in the startup, I had no idea how much that conversation with Wingyu would change my trajectory, like, as a human being. And only in hindsight do I see how important that conversation was. Same thing with when I just mentioned like XGBoost and CatBoost. If I had started in AI and ML 10 years ago, when those packages didn't exist, or when a lot of this cloud architecture didn't exist, I might not have made it. Like, a lot of the fact that I can do AI and ML right now is there's a whole bunch of researchers that have done a whole bunch of research in this space, so that all their knowledge is packaged up into a Python package that I can, import XGBoost as XGB, right? And that is something I like to remember to not take for granted. And there's ways then that you become that next layer for the next person coming after you that may not know what you're giving them, what gift you're giving them by telling, like, I'm going to shortcut you 5 years by telling you this one thing. But I always look out for both. Where can I be grateful for the work that people have done ahead of me? And where can I then feed that back into the people that are coming up to save them the 5 years that I had to take to learn some of this stuff? So thank you all so much for having me here. There's one more. Oh, thanks. We're hiring. So if you are interested in applying to, we don't require degrees, obviously, advanced or otherwise. If you can answer hard questions like the ones that we described, if you like or you want to learn to like licorice jelly beans, we're a fully remote team. You can email your resume to hello@storytellers.ai. And with that, I will take some questions.
That was outstanding. Thank you so much. When we were having lunch, I didn't know that they were called licorice jelly beans, but you were just gushing about data and cleaning up the data and getting the data ready. And usually everyone's just saying, nah, not for me. So now I know your beans. Anybody can offer a question on Zoom. Ozge is following that. Do we have a question here in the audience? Yes.
Well, I always have
Here you go, Stan. I know I can count on you.
Yes, I always have questions. First off, thank you so much for coming and speaking, and clearly you're very passionate about the topic, and I learned a lot. Thank you. But I'm a business person, so my job is to collect data, analyze the data, and act. Can MLAI help me stop collecting data so that I can act? You know, and where I'm talking about is that you can collect data forever, but at some point in time you have to move.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it comes down to there's this question that I had in there that's like, how good does your intelligence need to be so that you are making a better decision than you are today? Which that was my favorite. I was in a meeting one time. Hopefully this anecdote's interesting. So I was in a meeting one time with it was a very controversial project I was working on. And this meeting was with like a few SVPs at Amazon, including like legal leadership, which is always like, oh my gosh, you know, you're like presenting, you're like, okay, this is, you know, it's nerve-wracking. And the conversation was starting to spin around this idea of like, should we start integrating this model into our business? Because how accurate is accurate enough for this model? I know you've told me the accuracy of this model, but how do I know? Like, it's not 100%. So how do I know that I should do this? And at this moment, it actually came out of my mouth before I even really registered the thought in my mind, which is the question isn't, is this model accurate enough? But will this model improve my decision-making above the decision-making that I'm making today? And that question, I'm super passionate. I've talked a lot about the black jelly beans. One of the black jelly beans that I really, really love is model evaluation. How do you go into a domain and actually understand a business person's decision-making process such that you know how accurate your solution needs to be to make the difference? And how do you then communicate that back to the business person to say, you can act now? Like, you haven't been acting here, you've been collecting your data such that we can build applications on your data, but how do you know now's the time to act on this data? And model evaluation and communication is the answer to that. Knowing how to look at a decision and identify the math that tells you when you are making a decision in this way, here's your error rate. Now we're going to train this model that's going to help you make that decision, and here's its error rate, and that error rate is above the one you're doing today. That's model evaluation. That was one of the, you know, it was on the cutting room floor of my, like, I wish people would have told me, but I wish someone would have explained to me that that's what model evaluation does, to contextualize how important it is. And so that would be my answer to you as a business person is, have you collected enough data such that you can act? The answer to that is, let's go analyze the decision you're making and what the risk and cost is. And now let's take a look at what would happen if we integrated this technology inside that, and it will improve your business. We can say that, you know, with confidence that we should now take a test. But I would say let's A/B test it first and make sure that it really does what we think it's going to do. Yeah, that would be my response. Thank you. Model evaluation was a very strong licorice flavor for lots of folks.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael. All right. Thank you. This has been so illuminating. I mean, I genuinely hope that everyone from the two groups I could speak for, the Master of Science and Business Analytics program, and also our Business Data Analytics minors are watching this, because it's so illuminating from the stance of, you know, there's always just this fear and uncertainty because it's such a wide and vast world of what skills do I need to know, what programs, what software, how do I cram it all in, how do I spend my time? And, you know, your testimony, your experience is fantastic to speak to that, but it also more proposes sort of a strategic approach, right? How do I navigate and how do I digest all of this to success? So thank you for that. Fantastic. So that's my feedback. Now I have my question.
Yes, please.
You know, we all know implicit biases are a real thing, okay? Not a tangible thing, maybe, per se, but they're real. You know, and one of the biases that rings home for me when I think of this concept as, you know, being an outlier in this field is the like me bias, right? And I may or may not be speaking from personal experience here, I'm giving that away, but in a data scientist interview, Well, I'll just say, I left an interview once where it was very clear I was just so completely disenchanted, and I said, I was not what that person wanted me to be. And what that person wanted me to be was their strict view of what a data scientist is. Do you have any thoughts on how to approach those situations?
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts, so I'm just structuring really quickly how to respond. Because it's like really central to, I love that idea because that's what I experience like on a daily basis as my, so I think my top level thing, I'm going to start with sort of like a tongue-in-cheek answer. I like to use that to my advantage. There's ways that this is just my personal experience with this. I tend to use that to my advantage because it has allowed me to kind of go into stealth mode and do things that maybe someone who may appear to be more data science-y would how would I put it? Because people aren't expecting me to be able to go write my own SQL query, if I tell them, hey, I kind of want to build this report. I know you guys are busy. If you just kind of granted me access, like, I'll go try and pull my own data. And they're thinking, there's no way this person, like, sure, I'll grant you data because there's no way you're going to go write that query. But then I got access to that database and I can build my own reports. I can unblock myself because I, like, have the skills to do that. So that's my first tongue-in-cheek answer is I've learned how to use that to my advantage because I don't look like what people are expecting. So that's my tongue-in-cheek first part. The second part is that's sort of the idea behind what I see is why it's so important to know not what they're asking, but what they're looking for. And I am pretty straightforward with folks where I think they're asking me an easy question. I actually will tell them the hard question they're asking me instead. So having that ability to look at the questions they're asking and really think deeply about, okay, they're asking me what my degree is. And on my resume, it says, Bachelor's of English Lit. When they start to ask me those questions about my degree, I will immediately think, what is the question they're trying to get an answer for? Like, what is the question? And then I'll actually tell them that. I'll actually say, like, oh yeah, you're probably surprised by the fact that I have a, degree in English Lit. You're probably wondering, like, how could someone with a degree in English Lit have the skills to build, fraud detection models for one of the largest retailers in the world, whatever the question is. And so I'll actually explicitly say it to them. And I found that rather than, there's no way for me to go back in time to fix, which I wouldn't do, but like to go back in time and change that decision. But there is a way for me to actually tell people, show people that they're asking too easy of a question of the people they're interviewing. And people actually receive that pretty well, surprisingly. You would think they would be like a little put off by the fact, but actually people tend to find it insightful that I can come in and say, I know I'm not what you're looking for. Like, I'm not gonna pretend like I'm what you're looking for. You're not actually, and if you want someone that looks like that, please go ahead and hire them. I have a different set of skills that you are never gonna find like in anyone else. I'm a total outlier in this space because of this experience that I have that's completely different than the experience of 90% of the people that are gonna walk in the door. And so I love that. Like, people actually end up being like, oh my gosh, I really was asking the question about what skills you have. You're right, So yeah, hopefully that's a satisfying answer. I really do find I make a lot of it a game, and that makes it fun for me. Like, how can I navigate this way, and how can I navigate it that way, such that everyone's outcome is, better than they would have hoped. Yeah. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Please.
Thank you. This is kind of a follow-up on that. Clearly you see the value in outliers, but and I apologize for asking you to make a general statement about a huge industry. As far as the industry-wide goes, are hiring managers, are people in positions like these, are they seeing the value that you're seeing in outliers? Is this still,
Is this still trailing in the industry? Where does that kind of fall?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll say there is certainly a headwind. Like when I think about my experience at Amazon, where I was having to have, when I'm, in my role, I'm being compared to people with PhDs in comp science that went to MIT. Like those are my peers. And there's certainly a headwind there. There's certainly gaps in my knowledge and understanding that they had filled because they did that PhD program that I'm, going to have to catch up on. And I think that risk, that's like this risk that people are looking at. It's riskier to say I'm going to pull this outlier into this scenario because I don't know what their gaps are, and maybe they don't even know what their gaps are. So I think that I do think that there is a headwind there. What I will say is that there has never been a time where it is, I won't say easier, because it's not easy, but there has never been a time where there are more options for how to prove value outside of the traditional resume. Like, it's wild. Like, I think about Kaggle as, when I was at Expedia was when I first heard of that. Like, someone had mentioned, like, there's this thing called Kaggle, right? So that must have been not more than 5 or 10 years ago. And now all of a sudden there's these data sets that are real domain data sets that you can demonstrate that you know how to manipulate. That wasn't a thing 10 years ago. And so what I would say is that while there's these headwinds in the industry, I think that having the perspective of I'm going to have to work harder to demonstrate something that someone else can demonstrate by saying one line in their resume. Other people are going to have one line that says, I was a data scientist at Amazon. We'll have to work harder as outliers to demonstrate the same thing with more words. I went on Kaggle. I am a grandmaster in Kaggle competition. Like, that's a real thing. That's a real thing people look for. Or I have a GitHub repository that has 500 stars. Or I'm a contributor to this open source technology you use in your operations, right? Like, all of those things are things that are achievable for anyone outside of any particular educational organization or any job. Anyone can go and do those things. And it's never been more available than it has now. And never has there been more awareness in the industry of these various ways of obtaining expertise. So I would say, personally, when I would look at resumes, if I saw an outlier, that was I would choose an outlier resume specifically because I'm like, I know they're going to have some insights for how this will work that I wouldn't get if I was, looking at someone with a very traditional background. I would say that a lot of my peers think that way, but I also think that there is more work to help people see. I think there's going to be some revolutions here where people are going to be like, the traditional data science degree, sorry to everyone who's in a data science degree right now, but there are alternatives to that people are really going to see the value in. Yeah.
We could do this all day.
I could too. It's
well,
fun.
Michael, you have a class to teach, so it's your call. Okay. Let's get another one.
What are the chances that hiring managers have the same mindset that you do, thinking of an outlier and giving them a chance to go into this industry versus picking someone who has a background in data science? And do you think there's a lot of them that are out there with the same mindset that you have, or is it rare?
I think, so I'll talk a little bit about my experience as a hiring manager. So I did a lot of hiring at Amazon. I was in hundreds and hundreds of interviews, all different types, because I worked in a lot of different job families at Amazon. So I interviewed marketers, interviewed data scientists. I was hiring data scientists to my team. I would say there are organizations which are more likely to take a risk than others. There are companies that value and have seen the value of people coming in from other fields and other experiences more than others. So I would say that I actually really liked my time at Amazon quite a bit. And part of why, the more I would be like, hey, can you give me more work? They just give you more work, right? And they don't really care. It's like, you're a marketer, but you want to do some data science work? Well, we need data science work. Go ahead and do it, right? So they don't have a very strong line of this is your job, this is your job, this is your job. So an organization like Amazon would be a good place where they're more likely to be receptive to people with different backgrounds. There are other industries, which I can't speak to personally because I haven't ever worked in these industries, but what I picture in my head, which is probably stereotypical, is like, I don't know, old banks or something, you know, like where their roles are just really stringent, like you're in your role and you do that role, and like there's a very specific, like, you know, box around your role, might be less likely to take a bet on someone with a different background. What I would say is generally in tech, it is, there's so much a culture of like wearing multiple hats and understanding the value of diverse teams that I think that's much more common today. I think my time at Amazon, I would say most of the hiring managers, especially for entry-level roles, are like, yeah, let's bring in the person who has a unique background versus someone who's like cookie cutter, because we know what we'll get with this cookie cutter, but the value, the disproportionate value you see, like these huge hockey sticks, come from where you don't know what you're gonna get. There's a risk there that could really pay off. And I think people in tech are much more likely to take that risk. Yeah. It's really fun to be like a hiring manager for that reason, to like try and find the person that's like, I really did have someone who applied to a job as a BI who did theater and political science. That was their degree. I was like, that's awesome. Like, yeah. Thank you. Other questions?
Okay, well, that was ridiculously outstanding and wonderful. Thank you for that. We're going to keep this evergreen and get it up on YouTube shortly thereafter, so that this can live on and we can keep the conversation going. But thank you so much. That was an outstanding presentation, and by the questions, you can tell.
Thank you.